Hello, my name is Colin Seidman. I go to Tandon studying chemical engineering, and today I will be reviewing conditioning and learning. So the agenda for today will be learning objectives, classical versus instrumental conditioning vocabulary that will be used, types of conditioning, combining and intersections of conditioning types, observational learning, discussion questions, additional resources, and other details. So today's learning objective is to distinguish between classical and instrumental conditioning, understand each conditioning's nuance, understanding how they influence human behavior outside the laboratory together between the conditioning types and separately, and list and explain 4 aspects of observational learning according to social learning theory. To achieve these objectives, we will go over the vocabulary, some examples, and have a course discussion. So the very basic definition for classical versus instrumental conditioning or classical conditioning, aka Pavlovian, is associates stimuli to environment. So your US, your unconditioned stimuli, to your UR, your unconditioned response. It is a morning alarm that you hate, walking into a crowded bus or a venue and having anxiety, swearing off foods that you've tried once, like cilantro for me, or your favorite music and getting happy from that. Name of the song. So this is originally found by Ivan Pavlov, and the study was done famously known as Pavlov's dog. The idea is you ring a bell and feed the dog would salivate, so a result extended to other events, so shock, illness, drug usage, and any other case of that classical conditioning. The other type is operant or instrumental. You learn to associate our own behaviors with events. So rewards and punishment. You go, a rat presses a lever and it will receive food. But pressing a lever, unlike a dog with a bell ringing and associating the bell with the food, the rat pressing a lever and will receive food later. So there is not that connection there. That stimulus, that unconditioned stimulus, is not gonna be there. So you have an action the animal itself makes that is then reinforced. So press the lever, then gets food. Not eating food while a bell is going over, so the bell is associated with the food. Here we're going to go over some vocabulary in a little detail, but you can refer back to these slides for the full definition. So blocking in classical conditioning is finding that no condition occurs to a stimulus, so that previous condition is void, basically. A conditioned compensatory response is in also classical conditioning, a conditioned response that opposes rather than is the same, the unconditional response. This function reduces the strength of the unconditioned response. There's conditioned response and conditioned stimulus. So the response is elicited by the conditioned stimulus after a classical condition has taken place, and then so there's the response due to that stimulus. Context is stimuli that are in the background whenever learning occurs. For instance, there's an example right there. However, context can also be provided by internal stimuli, such as sensory effects of drugs. So when you think of a trigger or something that happens because of partially happens because of context, there's discriminative stimulus. In operant conditioning, a stimulus that signals whether the response will be reinforced, it is set to the occasion for the operant response. Extinction, sort of like the other thing is decrease the strength and the value of learned behavior that occurs when the conditioned stimulus is presented without the unconditioned stimulus. So the behavior is no longer reinforced. Fear conditioning is classical as well, and it is conditioned stimulus associated with an adverse unconditioned stimulus, such as foot shock. It evokes fear. There's goal-directed behavior, an instant behavior that is influenced by an animal's knowledge of the association between the behavior and a positive or negative consequence. So you do something to achieve a goal. Habit, instrumental behavior that occurs automatically in the presence of stimulus and no longer influenced by the animal's knowledge of the value or of the reinforcer. In instrumental conditioning, law of effect, You can read through these later. I will give you, please pause and review. There is as much reinforcement, there's a punish, which is the opposite. There's quantitative law of effect. We'll go into that later. Reinforcer, prediction error, and operant is a behavior that is controlled by its consequence. So please pause and read over these definitions before we will be using them in our later conversation. There is reinforcer, devaluation effect, renewal effect. There is social learning theory, which involves social models, spontaneous recovery. There's stimulus control, taste aversion learning. There's UR and US, which is unconditioned response, unconditioned stimulus, and there is vicarious reinforcement. So please pause, read, and be ready to use these in the discussion. So types of conditioning continue now that we have some more background context is conditioned stimulus will equal to your CR, so the bell with the food. It explains many but not all ways of learning. No one theory or method would. It is not a simple response. So it's not when the dog drools, it doesn't just drool. Its inner chemistry will change. It will secrete enzymes towards the processing of food. My heart might race. There's positives and negatives. Just as if you go downstairs and let's say you love bacon and you smell the bacon from your bedroom in a house, your mouth could water, but you also might feel joy or a ton of other responses. So fear conditioning is a type of response that sort of is related to that conditioned stimulus. So you get a fear conditioned stimulus, the response, it could cause anxiety disorders as found in many human anxiety disorders. There's associations to context, so conditioned compensatory responses, and leading to there's also taste aversion conditioning. So something tastes bad, use an animal training a lot, use that conditioned stimulus and association. There's instrumental, which works through the Thorndike's law of effect. Positive result from behavior will likely be repeated. So you get good grades, you get stimulus, and therefore you want to maintain that positive reinforcement. Then you could interpolate off that and really say, wait, if I'm no longer getting these good stimulus, no longer getting these good grades, what could I do to improve? So that's a way of learning and conditioning. Maybe I'll talk more in class. There's punisher, which is the opposite of reinforcer, but is another tool to reinforce. So here is a good example of classical or Pavlovian conditioning versus instrumental and operant conditioning. The bell to the cheese versus the pedal and the cheese. There's also different phases of association. So the bell is to the cheese, but then you have the context, that background, that setting. And so you're going to have the bell with the cheese, and then you're going to have the light on while you do the bell with the cheese. So that's completely in the background. But now, what's going to happen when you don't ring the bell and it's just the light on? It's going to have that association to context, that conditioned compensatory response. So the learning process is next. So there's this idea of blocking. In the effect, an animal first learns to associate one stimulus to, let's say, the bell, to something, and then once it's learned, a second stimulus, B, is presented alongside stimulus A, such that the two stimuli are paired with the stimulus together. And so this is back to that light example. The animal has already learned the association between the stimulus, so it doesn't learn the association between stimulus B and the food. That is, the conditioned response only occurs during the presentation of stimulus A. So it's background, it's there, it's impacting, but you're not going to get the entire stimulus because it's already been associated. So A is blocking the conditioning of B when B is added to A, but that's not saying they don't have effect on each other. So learning depends on also discrepancy. So between what is predicted and what is yeah, discrepancy between what is predicted by cues and what is conditioned, so you get that prediction error. Condition can also be deleted if C is present without the US, so that'd be extinction. Spontaneous recovery can happen after extinction. Re-exposure to CS evokes conditioned response. So spontaneous recovery, you can get it back, that condition. New context, kind of a renewal effect, new context, and then you get a condition, you can get that condition again. Stimulus control of an operant behavior can lead to discriminative stimulus, or is just when an operant behavior is under stimulus control, it is discriminative stimulus. And another part of learning process would be categorization. So there's the quantitative law of effect. So choice is really powerful in operant conditioning. So quantitative law of effect, reinforce and payoff rate, understood without going in or quantitative detail. So the law acknowledges the fact that things reinforce positive or negative behavior depending on how much is earned, the value. So if a pigeon learns the pecking one light will reward 2 pellets, where the other light rewards 1, the pigeon will peck only the one that will have 2, even though they're both positive. So that's the idea. Operant conditioning requires choosing. Student goes to a bar on Thursday, they get bad grades, they're gonna have a learning from that. A rat presses a lever, positive or negative. So that's operant, and that is choosing, and how that. So a rat could crawl all around a cage. It could jump on things, pull things. It could have all these options, but that one lever is the only thing that will give that positive result, or the better result. Then it would choose that. If there was a negative result, it would not. It would very adamantly not, depending on the conditioning. So, cognition of instrumental learning. Reinforcers do more to strengthen the behaviors. There's the value of consequences. It is goal directed. So, you can always review slides. The idea is that if you see illustrated here, there's 2 options, but one option leads to that, both positive. So they both have 2 different reinforcers. The rat's going to press both levers. It's not just going to press the one lever that would have the one effect. It's not going to pick when it could do both. So it's not one or the other. There's levels of complexity here. So that leads to the intersection of learning types. So basically, a big takeaway from this topic, which in under 20 minutes, a lot of analysis can occur, but there is, just like every unit, a lot of intersection. And these things do not happen independently. So here's a good illustration going over these behaviors, but a stimuli can act with classical conditioning and have an outcome. Ring a bell while the dog is eating. Ringing a bell will stimulate that. But also it could have a stimuli could be a part of a habit and go to your response. It could be a stimuli could go to an occasion setting and result in going to that, affecting that operant conditioning. So a stimuli might not go straight to a positive or negative response or an outcome, but it could go to a response. It could change how a response affects the outcome. And, these arrows are just 1, 2, 3, and a 4, but there's all the other environmental factors and back and forth that could develop training. If you think of like machine learning, you have to train these systems to have the outcome that we would want. So if you think about people, the more data, the more input, the more conditioning, setting, habit, context, and all these different types, and to the different extents and values of each thing and situations and experiences, it develops. There's observational learning, which is separate than the previous two we've discussed. It is based off of social learning theory. So basically, it does not necessarily require reinforcement. You could have vicarious reinforcement, someone's doing something and you see it done over and over again maybe, and it reinforces that behavior to you, even though you did not experience that. So, for instance, at work recently, I was in a meeting and I did not know how to discuss with this contractor about upgrading these tankers in this facility. So, I would watch my boss talk to different contractors a few times about how to communicate what their expectations are, what they want done, what they want in their study and original preliminary assessment. And I would watch that, and now I'm confident on how I would go about it, and I learned that through their model. So I paid attention and I got that learning. There's a doll experiment where they treat this doll in front of children. One group is aggressive, one group is non-aggressive, and then they would see how the children reacted later. So I could share the results with you, but I think it'd be more valuable if everyone does the reading and watches the video associated and discuss it in the discussion section, and think about things in your life that, maybe the Bobo doll experiment is a very drastic one way or the other, but, video games or TV, watching your family watch the news, or any other example. Another idea of observational learning that I think is a good example is the EG 1003 class at Tandon. TAing, it is peer-led. So, a lot of it is watching to get that retention for engineering students so they're not intimidated by the subject. What they do a lot is they have this one class where you watch, your peers, sophomores and juniors and seniors, TA, but they don't just TA, they lead the courses, they are mentors, they are working on projects independently there, and you sort of watch how they interact with each other, you watch how they study, and they direct you, and you see how your coworkers work. So, yeah. And the 4 really important parts for observational learning would be attention, retention, initiation, and motivation. Are you motivated? Are you paying attention? Are you doing it consecutively? And are you initiating it? And is it how much are you investing in this observation, and how much are the other parties showing? Are they disinterested? Are they actively go-getters about some type of activity or thing or something you're experiencing? So many factors, many ways to look into it, but that's a basic overview of observational learning. So here are just some questions you can pause and consider. You don't have to discuss these, but I thought they are just good food for thought. This is my email. Please feel free to reach out. And here is a list of the citations and additional resources. Thank you all. I hope you all have a lovely summer.